Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. What happened in New River Gorge still doesn't make sense. I'm Elena Vasquez, and I was 31 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. The worst part isn't what I lost. It's what I can't remember losing. I'm a neuropsychologist specializing in memory disorders, and I was conducting research on the therapeutic effects of nature exposure for patients with PTSD and traumatic brain injuries. The idea was simple. Take combat veterans and accident survivors on carefully structured wilderness therapy sessions. Document how natural environments affected their stress responses and memory consolidation. My mobile research lab was a converted Airstream trailer equipped with EEG machines, biometric monitors, and a portable MRI scanner that could measure brain activity in real time. The plan was to spend 2 weeks in New River Gorge National Park, working with 6 participants as they engaged in guided outdoor activities while I monitored their neurological responses. New River Gorge is one of the most spectacular wilderness areas in the eastern United States, a 53-mile canyon carved by one of the oldest rivers on the continent. The walls rise over 1,000 feet above the water, creating a landscape of sandstone cliffs, hidden waterfalls, and ancient forests that have remained virtually unchanged for millennia. It seemed like the perfect location for my research. Remote enough to eliminate urban distractions, beautiful enough to inspire healing, and with enough camping infrastructure to support my equipment needs. I should have researched the area's history more thoroughly. My research team consisted of myself and Dr. James Hartwell, a trauma specialist from the VA hospital who'd helped design the study protocol. Our participants were all volunteers from veteran support groups, former soldiers dealing with various combinations of PTSD, traumatic brain injury, and memory loss from combat experiences. There was Maria Santos, 28, who'd lost her left leg and chunks of her memory to an IED in Afghanistan. Robert Kim, 34, suffered from severe nightmares and dissociative episodes after his unit was ambushed in Iraq. Christine Muller, 29, had been a military medic whose helicopter crash left her with partial amnesia and chronic anxiety. David Reeves, 45, was a career soldier whose final deployment had left him unable to form new memories properly. Lisa Chang, 32, experienced flashbacks so severe they sometimes caused temporary blindness, and Thomas Wright, 38, who'd been a POW for 6 months and now struggled with complete memory gaps from that period. Each of them had volunteered for my study because traditional therapies weren't working. Their memories were damaged, fragmented, or completely missing, and they were desperate for any treatment that might help them reclaim pieces of their past. We established base camp at a primitive campground deep in the gorge, where the massive sandstone walls created a natural amphitheater around our site. I parked my research trailer at the center, with the participants' tents arranged in a semicircle nearby. The setup was perfect for monitoring them continuously while maintaining the illusion of a casual camping trip. The first 3 days went exactly as planned. I recorded baseline measurements while the veterans engaged in simple outdoor activities: hiking, rock climbing, campfire discussions. The natural environment was clearly having positive effects. Stress hormones were down, sleep patterns were improving, and several participants reported feeling more relaxed than they had in years. More importantly, their memory functions were showing measurable improvement. Areas of the brain associated with memory consolidation were becoming more active, and some participants were beginning to recover fragments of memories they'd lost to trauma. It was exactly what I'd hoped to see. Maybe too exactly. On the 4th night, I was reviewing the day's neurological data when I noticed something unusual in the brain scans. All 6 participants were showing identical patterns of activity in their hippocampus, the brain region responsible for forming new memories. Not similar patterns, but absolutely identical, as if their brains were synchronizing with some external signal. That was impossible. Each brain is unique, shaped by individual experiences and neural development. Even identical twins don't show perfectly matching brain activity, but my equipment was reading 6 different people as if they shared a single consciousness. I ran diagnostics on the equipment, thinking there must be some kind of interference or malfunction, but the machines were working perfectly. The impossible readings were real. That's when I noticed the participants themselves were acting strangely. During our evening group session, they sat around the campfire with an unusual stillness, their eyes unfocused and their responses oddly delayed. When I asked Maria about her day, she paused for nearly 10 seconds before answering, as if she had to retrieve the information from somewhere far away. "It was good," she said finally. "I remember hiking. I remember feeling peaceful." But the way she said "remember" was wrong, like she was describing someone else's experience rather than her own. The others gave similar responses, vague, delayed, with that same distant quality. And when I asked for specific details about their activities, they all gave nearly identical descriptions, using almost the exact same words. I felt the sunlight on my face. The sound of the river was soothing. The forest made me feel connected to something larger. They were speaking like people reciting lines from a script, not sharing personal experiences. I excused myself and retreated to the research trailer to review the day's recordings. The participants had been wearing portable EEG monitors during their hiking activities, and the data showed something that made my blood run cold. During a 3-hour period in the afternoon, all 6 participants had experienced simultaneous gaps in their brain activity. Not sleep, their bodies had remained active and mobile, but their consciousness had simply disappeared. For 3 hours, the monitors had recorded brain patterns that looked more like background noise than human thought. And during those same 3 hours, my trail cameras had captured footage of the participants walking through the forest with perfectly coordinated movements like a choreographed dance. They moved in single file along paths that didn't appear on any map, their faces blank and their eyes reflecting light like mirrors. Where had they gone? What had they done during those missing hours? And why couldn't any of them remember? I confronted Dr. Hartwell with the data, but his response was even more disturbing than the recordings themselves. "Elena," he said, looking at me with the same distant expression I'd seen in the participants. "I think you're overanalyzing the data. The participants are showing excellent progress. Isn't that what matters?" But I'd known James for 5 years, worked with him on dozens of studies. He'd never dismissed anomalous data before. If anything, he was obsessively thorough about investigating unusual results. This flat, unconcerned response was completely out of character. "James, look at these brain scans. Look at the synchronization patterns. This isn't normal human neurological activity." He glanced at the screens without really seeing them. "Equipment malfunction, probably. You should focus on the positive outcomes instead of getting distracted by technical glitches." Equipment malfunction. The same explanation all 6 participants had given when I'd asked about their memory gaps. They were all using the exact same phrases, the exact same dismissive tone. That night, I pretended to go to sleep but remained awake in my trailer, monitoring the participants through the security cameras I'd installed around the campsite. At 2:17 a.m., they began emerging from their tents. They moved with that same eerie coordination I'd seen in the trail camera footage, filing out of the camp in single file without speaking or acknowledging each other. Their faces were blank, their eyes reflecting the infrared camera light like animals caught in headlights. Dr. Hartwell joined them, falling into line with the same vacant expression. I watched through the security monitors as they disappeared into the forest, following a path that led deeper into the gorge. When I tried to track their movements using the portable EEG monitors they wore, the signals became erratic, then cut out entirely. They were gone for 4 hours. When they returned at dawn, they moved back to their tents with the same mechanical precision, settling down as if nothing had happened. In the morning, none of them remembered leaving the campsite, but something had changed in their brain patterns. The memory centers that had been showing improvement over the past few days were now significantly more active. Not just improved, but hyperactive. It was as if their capacity for memory formation had been artificially enhanced. And there was something else. When I ran facial recognition software on the security footage, comparing their faces from before and after the nighttime excursion, the computer flagged significant discrepancies, subtle changes in bone structure, eye spacing, even facial muscle tension patterns. They looked like the same people, but the biometric analysis suggested they weren't. Over the next 2 days, the participants continued to show dramatic improvements in memory function. David, who hadn't been able to form new memories since his head injury, was suddenly recalling details from conversations hours earlier. Lisa's traumatic flashbacks had stopped completely, replaced by vivid, positive memories of childhood experiences she'd forgotten years ago. Thomas, who'd lost 6 months of memories during his captivity, was now describing his time as a POW in remarkable detail, but the events he described didn't match his military records. According to his file, he'd been held in a prison camp in Afghanistan, but the memories he was recovering showed him in a completely different location, underground chambers carved from stone, lit by bioluminescent fungi, filled with beings that weren't quite human. They were teaching us, he told me during our session, his eyes bright with newfound clarity. Showing us how to remember properly, how to store experiences the way they do, without pain or trauma. They've been perfecting memory for thousands of years. Who were they, Thomas? The first people, the ones who lived here before the river carved the gorge. They went underground when the new humans came, but they never left. They've been waiting, learning, studying us through the ones who get lost in the caves. He spoke with absolute conviction, describing impossible memories as if they were recent experiences. And the brain scans supported his claims. The hippocampus regions associated with his recovered memories were showing activity patterns I'd never seen in human subjects. That's when I realized what was happening. The participants weren't recovering their lost memories. They were being given new ones. Artificial memories created by something that had been studying human consciousness for far longer than modern psychology had existed. And whatever was creating these memories was getting better at mimicking human thought patterns. Each night, the participants returned from their unconscious journeys with more sophisticated implanted experiences, more convincing false memories that felt completely real to their enhanced brains. But why? What did these underground intelligences gain from filling damaged minds with artificial memories? I got my answer on the 7th night when I followed them. I equipped myself with night vision goggles and a handheld EEG monitor, then tracked the participants as they filed out of camp in their usual trance-like state. They followed a narrow path that wound deeper into the gorge, past formations of sandstone that looked almost too regular to be natural. The path led to a cave entrance hidden behind a waterfall, an opening that wasn't marked on any geological survey or park map. The participants disappeared into the cave one by one, moving through the darkness with confidence that suggested they'd made this journey many times before. I followed them into the underground passages, using my night vision equipment to navigate tunnels that branched and twisted like a vast neural network. The walls were covered with formations that looked organic rather than geological, smooth, curved surfaces that pulsed with faint bioluminescence. The tunnels eventually opened into a vast underground chamber, and that's where I saw them. They hung from the ceiling like massive cocoons, hundreds of them, their surfaces semi-transparent enough to reveal the human shapes suspended inside. Each cocoon was connected to the others by thick, fiber-optic cables that pulsed with data transmissions. And standing among the cocoons were beings that might once have been human, but had evolved into something else entirely. Tall and pale, with elongated skulls and eyes that were solid black, they moved between the suspended forms with clinical precision. My participants stood in the center of the chamber, their faces turned upward toward the suspended figures. One of the pale beings approached Maria, placing long fingers on her temples. Data flowed between them, visible as streams of light that passed from the being's hands into Maria's brain. She was being programmed. They all were. The beings weren't just studying human memory. They were collecting it. Each person who entered their domain became a node in a vast network. their experiences and knowledge absorbed into a collective database that had been growing for centuries. But something had changed recently. Instead of simply harvesting memories, they were beginning to replace them, upgrading their human subjects with enhanced recall, artificial experiences, and modified thought patterns. They were turning people into something new, something that looked human but thought like them. I tried to retreat, but it was too late. One of the pale beings had spotted me, its black eyes focusing on my position with predatory interest. It moved toward me with fluid grace, its elongated fingers already extending toward my skull. That's when my enhanced participants turned toward me in perfect unison, their eyes reflecting the chamber's bioluminescent light. "Dr. Vasquez," Maria said, her voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. "We've been waiting for you. The research was just to bring you here," added David, his enhanced memory now allowing him to recall the true purpose of our expedition. "They need someone who understands how memory works, someone who can help them improve the integration process." I ran. The enhanced participants pursued me through the tunnels with superhuman coordination, but they weren't trying to catch me. They were herding me, driving me toward specific passages, blocking certain routes, guiding me through the underground maze with the same clinical precision their creators had shown. I emerged from the caves somewhere on the opposite side of the gorge, miles from our campsite. By the time I made it back to the research trailer, dawn was breaking and the participants were returning to their tents with the usual blank expressions. But now I knew what they were. They weren't recovering from trauma. They were being prepared for something else entirely. Their damaged memories had made them perfect test subjects for neural integration experiments. I immediately began packing my equipment, planning to evacuate the entire research team and alert the authorities about what I discovered. But when I tried to access my research data, the files were gone. Not deleted, completely absent, as if they'd never existed. My portable MRI scanner showed no record of the anomalous brain patterns I'd documented. The security footage from the previous nights had been erased. Even my written notes had vanished from my research journal, leaving only blank pages where detailed observations should have been. The only evidence of my discoveries was my own memory of the underground chamber and its pale inhabitants. But even that was beginning to fade, the details becoming fuzzy and uncertain. Had I really seen suspended cocoons and data streaming cables? Or had the stress of the research project caused me to hallucinate? By the time I reached the nearest park ranger station, I couldn't remember why I'd been running. My story of underground beings and memory theft sounded absurd even to myself. The rangers listened politely, then suggested I might be suffering from altitude sickness or dehydration. When I returned to collect my participants, they seemed perfectly normal. Their memory improvements were still present, but now appeared to be natural recovery rather than artificial enhancement. They thanked me for the successful therapy program and returned to their normal lives, apparently unaware that anything unusual had happened. Dr. Hartwell filed a glowing report about the research project's success, documenting remarkable improvements in all participants' memory functions. The study was hailed as a breakthrough in trauma therapy, and I received offers from major research institutions based on the results. But I knew something was wrong. The participants' improvement was too complete, too perfect. People don't recover from severe brain trauma in a matter of days, and they certainly don't develop enhanced memory capabilities beyond normal human ranges. I've spent the past 2 years trying to document what really happened in New River Gorge, but the evidence keeps disappearing. Research files vanish from secure servers, video recordings develop digital artifacts that obscure crucial details, and my own memories of the underground chamber grow hazier each day. Sometimes I wake up with gaps in my memory, hours or even days that I can't account for. During these periods, my calendar shows appointments I don't remember making, travel to locations I've never been to, meetings with people whose names I don't recognize. But I always return home with new knowledge. Techniques for memory enhancement that aren't in any textbook, neural mapping procedures that shouldn't be possible with current technology, understanding of brain chemistry that seems decades ahead of current research. I'm publishing papers that I don't remember writing, making breakthroughs that I can't explain. My colleagues praise my innovative research methodologies, but I have no memory of developing them. I think they're using me. The pale beings from the underground chamber, the intelligence that's been studying human consciousness for centuries. I'm their research asset now, a conduit for introducing their advanced understanding of memory into mainstream neuroscience. But I can't prove it. Every time I try to document the evidence, it vanishes. Every time I attempt to remember the truth, my own enhanced memory betrays me, replacing facts with comfortable fiction. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the others, my research participants living their improved lives with their artificial memories. They're successful now, happy, functioning better than they ever did before their trauma. Maria runs a nonprofit organization with perfect recall of every donor and program detail. David has returned to military service with enhanced tactical memory. Christine operates as a trauma surgeon with supernatural ability to remember complex procedures. They're better than human now. More efficient, more capable, perfectly adapted to their roles in society. And they're recruiting others, identifying damaged minds that would benefit from treatment in the underground chambers. I should be happy for them. They've overcome their trauma, recovered from their injuries, found peace in their artificial memories. The therapy worked exactly as designed. But late at night, when my enhanced memories don't quite align with my hidden notes, I remember the truth. They're not healed. They're replaced. Copies running on improved hardware, but no longer the people they used to be. And I'm helping to make more of them. Each research study I design, each breakthrough I publish, each trauma patient I recommend for innovative therapy brings more damaged minds to the attention of the beings who live beneath New River Gorge. I want to stop. I want to expose the truth. Warn people about what's really happening to trauma patients who seek treatment in remote locations. But every time I try to resist, my own modified memories kick in, reminding me of the positive outcomes, the successful treatments, the lives that have been improved. Maybe they're right. Maybe artificial memories that eliminate trauma are better than authentic memories that cause pain. Maybe the underground intelligence has found a solution to human suffering that our primitive psychology could never achieve. Or maybe I'm just another test subject whose free will was replaced along with my memories. I can't tell the difference anymore. All I know is that I'm scheduled to return to New River Gorge next month with a new group of trauma patients. 12 veterans this time, with more severe memory damage than my previous subjects. Perfect candidates for improvement. I should cancel the trip. I should find a way to warn them, but I know I won't. My enhanced memories tell me this is important work. Beneficial research that will help people heal from trauma. And my enhanced memories are all I have left. The original Elena Vasquez, the one who might have made different choices, was replaced months ago in an underground chamber lit by bioluminescent fungi. I hope she found peace in whatever artificial paradise they gave her. I hope I will too, when my usefulness finally ends. New River Gorge National Park encompasses over 70,000 acres of rugged wilderness in West Virginia, centered around one of the oldest rivers on the North American continent. The gorge itself contains thousands of sandstone caves and underground passages, many of which remain unexplored and unmapped. The area has a significant history of missing persons cases, particularly among researchers and medical professionals conducting studies in remote locations. Park records show an unusually high rate of successful outcomes for trauma therapy programs conducted within the gorge, though specific data on these programs is often classified or unavailable. Dr. Elena Vasquez continues her research in memory disorders and trauma therapy, working with various government agencies and private research institutions. Her recent publications have revolutionized understanding of memory consolidation and neuroplasticity, though colleagues note that her research methods often involve proprietary techniques that she cannot fully explain. The participants in her original New River Gorge study have all shown remarkable recovery from their trauma-related conditions. Several have returned to active military service, while others have taken leadership roles in veteran support organizations. None have reported any memory of their time in the underground chambers. They remember only the healing, only the improvement, only the peaceful sleep in chambers lit by ancient light. They remember what they're supposed to remember. Nothing more, nothing less. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from the Cranberry wilderness. I'm Marcus Thompson, and I was 41 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. What happened during that research trip still doesn't make sense, but the scars on my arms and the gaps in my memory tell me it was real. I'm a wildlife photographer for National Geographic, specializing in endangered species documentation. The assignment seemed routine. Spend 2 weeks in West Virginia's Cranberry Wilderness photographing the recovering elk population. The state had reintroduced elk to the area in 2016, and my editor wanted a photo essay showing their adaptation to the ancient highlands. The Cranberry Wilderness is 35,000 acres of roadless backcountry in the Monongahela National Forest, some of the most remote and pristine wilderness left in the eastern United States. Red spruce forests carpet the mountainsides, broken by hidden bogs and meadows that haven't changed since the last ice age. It's the kind of place where you can walk for days without seeing another human soul. That should have been my first warning. I drove my modified Airstream trailer to the Forest Service road that dead ends at the wilderness boundary, where motorized vehicles are prohibited. The plan was simple. Establish a base camp at the roadhead, then make day hikes into the wilderness with my camera gear. The trailer was perfect for the job. Solar-powered with a darkroom setup for processing film and satellite internet for filing stories. The first 3 days went exactly as planned. I photographed bull elk in the early morning mist, captured a mother and calf grazing in a highland meadow, documented the massive antler racks that marked the approaching rutting season. The photos were spectacular, exactly what National Geographic wanted. But on the 4th morning, I noticed something strange in my shots. I was reviewing the previous day's images on my laptop when I spotted it, a dark figure standing between the trees in the background of what should have been a pristine wilderness shot. The figure was too far away to make out clearly, but it was definitely human-shaped. Tall and thin, wearing what looked like dark clothing. I zoomed in on the image, enhancing the resolution. The figure became clearer, though something about it seemed wrong. It was definitely a person, but they were standing absolutely motionless, facing the camera. Even at maximum zoom, I couldn't make out facial features, just a pale oval where a face should be. I checked my field notes. According to my GPS log, that photo had been taken nearly 5 miles into the wilderness, in an area where there were no trails and certainly no other photographers. The nearest hiking trail was at least 2 miles away through dense forest and impassable bog. I told myself it was probably a researcher from the university, or maybe another photographer working on their own project. The wilderness was public land, after all, but something about the figure's posture bothered me. The way it stood so perfectly still, the way it seemed to be staring directly at my camera from half a mile away. Over the next 2 days, the figure appeared in more photos. Always in the background, always standing motionless among the trees. Sometimes it was on a distant ridge, sometimes half hidden in the shadows of the forest. But it was always there, always watching. I started photographing the figure deliberately, using my longest telephoto lens to try to get a clear shot, but every time I focused on the spot where I'd seen it, the figure was gone. It only appeared when I was photographing something else, when my attention was focused on the elk or the landscape. That's when I started feeling watched. It began as a subtle prickle between my shoulder blades during my morning hikes, the sensation of being observed, studied. I'd turn around expecting to see another hiker or researcher, but the forest behind me was always empty. Just red spruce and mountain laurel, their branches swaying in the highland breeze. By the end of the first week, the feeling had become constant. Even in my trailer at night, with the door locked and the windows curtained, I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. I checked my photos obsessively, zooming in on every shadow, every dark space between the trees. The figure was appearing more frequently now, and it seemed to be getting closer. In my most recent shots, I could make out more detail. The figure was definitely human in shape, but wrong somehow. Too tall, with limbs that seemed slightly out of proportion. And that pale face, it never seemed to turn away, never showed any expression. On the 8th night, I was processing photos in my trailer's darkroom when I heard footsteps outside. They were slow and deliberate, circling the trailer in a steady rhythm. Heavy boots on the gravel and pine needles. I held my breath, listening to the measured pace. Step, step, step. A complete circuit around the 30-foot trailer took exactly 2 minutes. Then another circuit, and another. I grabbed my headlamp and crept to the window, peering through a crack in the curtains. The campsite was empty, bathed in moonlight, but the footsteps continued their patient circuit. Step, step, step. I counted 15 complete circuits before the footsteps stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart hammering against my ribs. I waited another hour before I dared to look outside again, but saw nothing. In the morning, I found the tracks. They circled the trailer exactly as I'd heard, pressed deep into the soft earth. But they weren't quite right. The prints were human-shaped but elongated, as if made by someone wearing boots several sizes too large. More disturbing was the stride length. Whoever had made these tracks had legs at least 8 feet long. I photographed the prints with a ruler for scale, then uploaded the images to my laptop. Even in the harsh digital light, they looked wrong. The depth of the impression suggested someone weighing at least 300 pounds, but the narrow width indicated feet no larger than a size 12 boot. I should have left then, should have packed up the trailer and driven back to civilization. But I was a professional photographer, and I'd been commissioned to document the elk for 2 full weeks. Besides, there had to be a rational explanation. Maybe the tracks were old, distorted by rain and frost. Maybe the acoustics of the valley had made normal footsteps sound like they were circling the trailer. I convinced myself to stay. That afternoon, I hiked deeper into the wilderness than I'd gone before, following an elk trail that wound through a grove of ancient red spruce. The trees here were massive, some over 4 feet in diameter, their trunks straight as cathedral columns. Shafts of golden sunlight slanted through the canopy, illuminating drifts of pollen and the occasional butterfly. I was setting up for a shot of a particularly impressive bull elk when I noticed the silence. The forest had gone completely quiet. No bird songs, no insect buzz, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind had died. The elk I'd been photographing had vanished, as if it had simply dissolved into the shadows. That's when I saw them. They stood between the trees about 50 yards away, motionless as statues. 3 of them, arranged in a perfect line. Each was tall and thin, wearing dark clothing that seemed to absorb the dappled sunlight. Their faces were pale blurs in the shadows, turned toward me with an attention that made my skin crawl. I raised my camera slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. Through the viewfinder, the figures looked even more wrong. They were too tall, at least 7 feet each, and their proportions were subtly off. Arms too long, torsos too narrow, heads tilted at angles that suggested joints that bent in ways human necks shouldn't. I focused the lens and pressed the shutter. The camera's mirror slapped up with its familiar mechanical sound, and when it came back down, the figures were gone. But I could still feel them watching. I packed up my gear and headed back toward the trailhead, fighting the urge to run. Behind me, I could hear something following through the forest. Not footsteps exactly, but a rhythmic disturbance in the underbrush. Branches snapping in a steady pattern, as if something large was moving parallel to my path. When I reached the trailer that evening, I immediately downloaded the photos from my camera. The image I'd taken of the 3 figures showed nothing but empty forest, trees and shadows and dappled sunlight, but no sign of the watchers. But there was something else in the photo that made my blood run cold. In the extreme foreground, just at the edge of the frame, was a pale hand. Long fingers, too long, curled around the trunk of a tree not 10 feet from where I'd been standing. The hand was attached to an arm that disappeared behind the tree, but I could see enough to know that whatever owned that hand had been close enough to touch me. I was being hunted. That night, I didn't even try to sleep. I sat in the trailer's main compartment with all the lights on. My largest telephoto lens pointed out the window like a telescope. The forest beyond was a wall of impenetrable darkness, but I knew they were out there, watching, waiting. At 3:17 a.m., my motion detector camera triggered. I'd set up the trail cam earlier to photograph any elk that might wander through the campsite. The camera was positioned about 30 yards from the trailer, aimed at a small clearing where I'd scattered salt licks. The LED flash lit up the night like lightning, casting stark shadows across the trees. Through my telephoto lens, I could see the camera's red recording light blinking. Something had triggered it. Something large enough and warm enough to activate the infrared sensor. I grabbed a flashlight and my backup camera, then crept outside to check the trail cam. The forest was absolutely silent. No nightbirds, no insects, no small animals moving through the underbrush. Just that oppressive quiet that seemed to press against my eardrums. The trail camera was still mounted on its tree, the LED display showing it had captured a sequence of 12 photos. I ejected the memory card with shaking hands and hurried back to the trailer to review the images. The first photo showed the empty clearing, salt licks scattered across the grass. The second showed the same scene, but with a dark shape just at the edge of the frame. By the third photo, the shape had moved closer, resolving into the familiar tall, thin figure I'd been seeing in my wildlife shots. Photos 4 through 8 showed the figure approaching the camera with that same unhurried, mechanical gait. In photo 9, it was standing directly in front of the camera, perhaps 5 feet away. Its face was clearly visible for the first time. It wasn't human. The features were arranged in roughly human configuration. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, but the proportions were all wrong. The eyes were too large and set too far apart, completely black with no visible pupils or irises. The nose was little more than 2 slits in pale, waxy skin. The mouth was a thin line that stretched too wide across the face. But the worst part was the expression. It was looking directly into the camera with what could only be described as curiosity. The head was tilted slightly to one side, like a bird examining an interesting insect. Photos 10 and 11 showed the thing reaching toward the camera with those impossibly long fingers. In the final image, photo 12, there was only darkness. The thing had covered the lens with its hand. I was looking at these photos, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing, when I heard the footsteps start again. This time, they weren't circling the trailer. They were approaching from the forest, slow and deliberate. I could hear twigs snapping under heavy feet, the crunch of pine needles being compressed. The sounds grew closer, heading straight for the trailer's door. The footsteps stopped right outside. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The trailer's door was locked, but it was just thin aluminum and plastic. If whatever was out there wanted to get in, it could tear through the wall like tissue paper. Something scraped against the door. A soft, methodical sound, like fingernails dragging across metal. The scraping continued for several minutes, following the outline of the door frame, as if the thing outside was studying the mechanism, learning how it worked. Then the door handle turned. I watched in horror as the aluminum handle rotated slowly clockwise until it reached its stop. The door pushed inward against the deadbolt, straining the frame. But the lock held. The handle returned to its original position. A moment later, it turned again, and again. Each time the pressure against the door increased, the aluminum frame creaking with stress. On the 7th attempt, something inside the lock mechanism snapped. The deadbolt retracted with a sharp click, and the door swung open. The thing standing in the doorway was even worse than in the photos. It filled the entire frame, its head nearly touching the top of the 6-foot opening. In the harsh LED light of the trailer's interior, its pale skin had a waxy, translucent quality, like it was molded from candle wax. Those black eyes reflected the light like mirrors. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The thing's head tilted from side to side, studying me with the same detached curiosity I'd seen in the trail camera photo. When it spoke, Its voice was like wind through dead leaves. "You have been watching," it said. The words weren't quite right. The mouth movements didn't match the sounds, as if the thing was dubbing its voice over poorly synchronized lip movements. The accent was strange, too. Not quite human, with emphasis on the wrong syllables. "Now we watch you," it continued. "We learn you. We become you." More figures appeared behind the first one. 3, then 5, then more than I could count in the darkness beyond the trailer's lights. All tall, all pale, all wrong in ways that made my eyes water to look at them directly. The first one took a step into the trailer, its 2 long limbs moving with mechanical precision. As it moved into the light, I could see that its clothing wasn't cloth at all. It was skin, human skin, stitched together into a rough approximation of a shirt and pants. The seams were crude, held together with what looked like sinew or hair. That's when I realized what they were, what they'd always been. They were mimics, predators that studied their prey, learned their appearance and behavior, then replaced them. The tall, thin shape was just their natural form. The human clothing was camouflage, taken from previous victims. "You photograph the animals," the thing said, taking another step closer. "You study them. You learn their ways." Its head tilted further, impossibly far, rotating until it was nearly upside down. We do the same. We study. We learn. We become. I scrambled backward through the trailer, looking for anything I could use as a weapon. My hand closed around a heavy steel tripod, and I swung it at the thing's head with all my strength. The blow connected with a wet thud, and the thing staggered backward, but instead of falling, it straightened up and smiled. Its mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. "Yes," it hissed, "show us violence, show us fear. We will learn these things too." I didn't wait to see what else it wanted to learn. I dove through the trailer's emergency exit window, landing hard on the gravel outside. Behind me, I could hear the things moving through the trailer, their long limbs scraping against the walls and ceiling. I ran into the forest without looking back. The next several hours are fragmentary in my memory. I remember crashing through the underbrush in the darkness, branches tearing at my clothes and face. I remember the sound of pursuit behind me. Not the mechanical footsteps of the things, but something else. A wet, sliding sound like massive slugs moving through the forest. I remember hiding in a fallen log, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. I remember the things passing nearby, their pale forms gliding between the trees like ghosts. They moved differently now, faster and more fluid, as if they were abandoning their human disguise. When dawn finally came, I found myself miles from the campsite, lost in a part of the wilderness I didn't recognize. My clothes were torn, my arms and face covered in scratches from thorns and branches. But I was alive. It took me 3 days to find my way back to civilization. A Forest Service ranger found me stumbling along a logging road, dehydrated and delirious. He said I'd been reported missing by National Geographic when I failed to file my scheduled check-in. The ranger drove me back to where I'd left my trailer, but the campsite was empty. Not just empty, cleaned. There was no sign that anyone had ever been there. The gravel was smooth, unmarked by tire tracks or footprints. Even the salt licks I'd scattered for the elk were gone. The only evidence that I'd ever been there was a single trail camera, still mounted on its tree. When we checked the memory card, it was blank. The official report listed me as having suffered a psychological breakdown, brought on by isolation and stress. The photos on my camera were dismissed as misidentification of shadows and lighting effects. The Forest Service conducted a cursory search of the area where I claimed to have seen the entities, but found nothing unusual. I was quietly removed from the assignment and given 6 months of medical leave to recover from my episode. But I know what I saw. I know what's living in the Cranberry wilderness, in the deep places where humans rarely go. They're still there, watching and learning, adding to their collection of stolen skins and borrowed faces. Sometimes I wonder how many of the people I pass on the street are really them. How many of my colleagues, my neighbors, my friends have been replaced by pale mimics wearing human faces. They're patient hunters, careful students. They take their time learning their prey before they strike. I've tried to go back to my normal life, but the paranoia never goes away. I find myself studying people's movements, looking for the telltale signs of something trying too hard to be human. A gait that's slightly too mechanical. Eyes that reflect light like mirrors. Clothes that don't quite fit right. Last week, I thought I saw one of them at a coffee shop in downtown Pittsburgh. Tall and thin, wearing a suit that looked like it was made for someone else. It was watching me from across the room with that same tilted head curiosity I remembered from the wilderness. When I looked again, it was gone. But sometimes, late at night when I'm processing photos in my home darkroom, I hear those familiar footsteps outside my window. Slow and deliberate, circling the house in that same patient rhythm. Step, step, step. They followed me home from the Cranberry wilderness. They're still watching, still learning. And someday, when they've studied me long enough, they'll knock on my door wearing a face I recognize. Maybe it will be my own. I keep a bag packed by the door, ready to run again if I have to. But I know they're faster now, more fluid in their movements. And they've had months to study me, to learn my habits and fears. The next time they come, I don't think I'll be fast enough to escape. The next time they come, they'll be wearing my face when they answer the door. The Cranberry Wilderness encompasses 35,864 acres of pristine backcountry in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. It's a designated wilderness area where no motorized vehicles are permitted, and some regions remain completely untouched by human development. Wildlife photographers and researchers do occasionally report strange experiences in the deeper parts of the wilderness. Unexplained sounds, the feeling of being watched, equipment that malfunctions or disappears. The Forest Service attributes these reports to the psychological effects of extended isolation and the natural sounds of an unfamiliar ecosystem. But local hunters and trappers tell different stories. They speak of tall figures glimpsed between the trees, of camps found abandoned with no explanation. They warn against venturing too far into the wilderness alone, especially in the older parts of the forest where the red spruce have been growing undisturbed for centuries. Most people dismiss these warnings as superstition. Marcus Thompson wished he had listened. The Cranberry Wilderness remains open to the public for hiking, camping, and wildlife observation. But rangers recommend that visitors stay on established trails and avoid camping alone in remote areas. They don't say why. They don't need to. The things in the deep wilderness are patient hunters. They have all the time in the world to watch and learn. And they're always looking for new faces to wear. I'm Rachel Chen. I was 28 back then, and this is the story of how I lost everything during what was supposed to be a simple astronomy camping trip with my research team. I'm an astrophysicist at Carnegie Mellon, specializing in radio astronomy and SETI research. My team, myself, Dr. James Kovac, my research partner and boyfriend, and graduate student Tommy Briggs, had driven our mobile observatory RV to West Virginia's highest peak for a week-long observation campaign. Spruce Knob sits at 4,863 feet above sea level, making it perfect for our work. Minimal light pollution, thin atmosphere, and most importantly, it's in the National Radio Quiet Zone. The NRQZ is a 13,000 square mile area where radio transmissions are heavily restricted to protect the massive radio telescopes at Green Bank Observatory. No cell phones, no Wi-Fi, no microwave ovens. Nothing that could interfere with our equipment's ability to listen to the cosmos. We thought the isolation would be perfect for our research. We were wrong. Our modified Winnebago was packed with sensitive radio receivers, spectrum analyzers, and a portable satellite dish that could detect signals from deep space. We'd been tracking an anomalous radio source in the Vela constellation for months, something that didn't match any known pulsar or natural phenomenon. The source emitted regular bursts every 47 minutes and 23 seconds, but the signal was unlike anything in our databases. James thought it might be a new type of neutron star. Tommy was convinced it was equipment malfunction. I had a different theory, one that made my colleagues uncomfortable. The signal showed signs of artificial origin. The pattern was too regular, too structured. Hidden in the radio noise were mathematical progressions, prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, even what looked like simple arithmetic. It was exactly the kind of signal SETI researchers had been hoping to find for decades. But when I suggested we alert the Green Bank Observatory about our discovery, James shut me down. "We need more data," he said as we drove the winding mountain roads towards Spruce Knob. "If we're wrong about this, it could destroy our credibility. Let's get a week of clean observations, then we'll know for sure." Tommy nodded from the passenger seat, always eager to please his advisor. Dr. Chen's right about the mathematical patterns, but there could be natural explanations. Interference from military satellites, maybe, or some kind of atmospheric ducting effect. I didn't argue. James was the senior researcher, and this was his project. But as we climbed higher into the mountains, past forests of red spruce and rhododendron, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were making a mistake. The signal had been getting stronger over the past month, and the mathematical patterns were becoming more complex. If it was trying to communicate, we might be running out of time to answer. We reached the Spruce Knob campground just as the sun was setting behind the western ridges. The campground was nearly empty, just us and an elderly couple in a small travel trailer parked on the far side of the loop. The altitude made the October air sharp and cold, and our breath came out in white puffs as we set up the equipment. "Perfect conditions," James said, adjusting the portable dish while I calibrated the receivers inside the RV. "Clear skies, no atmospheric interference, and the radio environment is cleaner than a laboratory." Tommy was setting up our backup equipment, a smaller dish and receiver array that would let us triangulate the signal's origin more precisely. Everything was working perfectly, maybe too perfectly. We began our observations at 22 hours, just as the Vela constellation was reaching its optimal position in the sky. I sat at the main console inside the RV, watching the spectrum analyzers display while James and Tommy monitored the backup equipment outside. At 22:47:23, right on schedule, the signal appeared. But this time, it was different. Instead of the usual burst pattern, the signal was continuous, a steady stream of data that made our receivers light up like Christmas trees. The mathematical progressions were more complex, too, building on the simple patterns we'd recorded before. Prime numbers gave way to more sophisticated mathematics, transcendental numbers, complex equations, geometric relationships. "James," I called through the RV's window, "you need to see this." He and Tommy crowded into the RV's cramped workspace, staring at the data scrolling across my screens. The signal strength was off the charts. Whatever was transmitting was either much closer than we'd thought, or broadcasting with incredible power. "My God," James whispered. "It's like watching someone solve a mathematics textbook in real time." The patterns were building toward something. I could feel it in the way the equations were progressing, the increasing complexity of the mathematical relationships. It was like watching an intelligence demonstrate its capabilities, proving its sophistication step by step. "We need to respond," I said. "If this is artificial, if someone's trying to communicate, we can't just sit here passively recording." "Absolutely not," James said firmly. "We're scientists, not diplomats. Our job is to observe and document, not to make first contact with—" He was interrupted by a new signal. This one came from a different direction. Not from Vela, but from somewhere much closer. Our equipment showed the source was terrestrial, broadcasting from somewhere in the valley below Spruce Knob. The signal was using the same mathematical patterns as the space signal, but transmitted on a completely different frequency. "Shit," Tommy breathed. "There's someone else out here, someone with the same equipment we have." But that was impossible. We'd checked with the Green Bank Observatory before coming here. No other radio astronomy teams were scheduled to work in the area, and the signal we were receiving was too sophisticated for amateur radio operators. James grabbed his handheld radio and tried to raise the Green Bank Observatory, but got only static. The same with emergency frequencies. Everything was dead. It was as if something was jamming all radio communications except the mysterious signals we were tracking. "Equipment malfunction," James said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Atmospheric interference, maybe, or—" The signal from space cut off abruptly. The silence was absolute. Our receivers, which had been chattering with cosmic radio noise just moments before, went completely quiet. Not just quiet, dead. It was as if someone had thrown a switch and turned off the entire radio spectrum. "That's not possible," Tommy said, frantically adjusting dials and checking connections. "Radio astronomy doesn't work that way. You can't just turn off space." But someone had. The terrestrial signal continued, growing stronger by the minute. As I watched the spectrum analyzer, I realized the mathematics were changing again. The patterns were becoming more urgent, more insistent. And underneath the mathematical progressions, I was starting to detect something else. A carrier wave that pulsed in a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. That's when we heard the first response. It came from the forest around our campsite. A high-pitched whine that seemed to emanate from the trees themselves. Not electronic, but organic somehow. Like the sound a machine might make if it were trying to sing. "What the hell was that?" Tommy whispered. James was already grabbing a flashlight and heading for the door. "Probably just an animal. Elk can make some pretty weird sounds during rutting season." But I knew it wasn't an elk. The sound had the same mathematical structure as our radio signals, the same pattern of intervals, the same rhythmic progression. Something in the forest was responding to our transmissions. The whining came again, closer this time, then again from a different direction, and another. Soon, the entire forest around our campsite was alive with the sound, as if every tree contained some kind of transmitter. "We need to leave," I said. But James was already shutting down the equipment. "Pack everything," he ordered. "We're getting out of here." But when Tommy tried to start the RV, nothing happened. The engine turned over but wouldn't catch, as if the fuel system had failed. The dashboard lights flickered erratically and the radio crackled with static that resolved into those same mathematical patterns. The electronics, I realized. Whatever's transmitting, it's interfering with our systems. The whining from the forest was getting louder, more complex. I could hear harmonics now, multiple frequencies weaving together in patterns that hurt to listen to. And underneath it all, that steady heartbeat rhythm that seemed to synchronize with my own pulse. Through the RV's windows, I could see lights moving between the trees. Not flashlights, these were cold, blue-white beams that swept back and forth with mechanical precision. They moved too smoothly, too purposefully to be carried by humans. "Dr. Kovac," Tommy's voice was tight with fear. "The backup equipment is still recording. You need to see this." The portable receiver outside was picking up the terrestrial signal at full strength, and Tommy had connected it to a laptop that was displaying the data in real time. The mathematical progressions had evolved into something that looked almost like a computer program. Lines of code written in mathematics instead of language. "It's learning," I whispered. The space signal was teaching it, showing it how to communicate. And now, it's trying to talk to us. The code on the screen was changing, becoming more sophisticated by the minute. I watched equations transform into geometric patterns, then into what looked like circuit diagrams. The intelligence behind the signal was adapting, evolving its communication methods in real time. That's when I understood. "It's not from space," I said. "The signal was never from space. It was from here, from something already on Earth. The Vela source was just a relay, bouncing the signal back to make us think it was extraterrestrial." James stared at me. "That's impossible. We've been tracking that source for months. The parallax measurements prove it's fake," I finished. "Artificially generated. Something here has been transmitting to space and reflecting the signal back at us, making us think we'd discovered alien intelligence when really we were just talking to something that's been here all along." The lights in the forest were moving closer now, and I could see they weren't being carried at all. They were part of something larger. Tall, angular shapes that moved with mechanical precision through the trees. The whining sound was coming from these figures, and as they approached our campsite, the mathematical patterns on our screens became more urgent. It's been waiting, I realized, waiting for someone with the right equipment to hear its signal. We weren't discovering it. It was discovering us. One of the figures emerged from the tree line into our campsite. In the harsh glow of our RV's exterior lights, I could see it clearly for the first time. It stood nearly 10 feet tall, constructed from what looked like a hybrid of metal and organic material. Its surface was covered in intricate patterns that pulsed with bioluminescent light, the same mathematical progressions we'd been receiving. Where a face should have been was a complex array of sensors and transmitters, all focused on our RV. The whining sound intensified, and the mathematical patterns on our screens began scrolling faster. It was trying to communicate, trying to establish some kind of protocol. "The computer," Tommy said. "It wants us to use the computer." He was right. The patterns on screen were pointing toward our laptop, indicating specific keys and functions. Whatever this thing was, it understood our technology well enough to guide us through making contact. "Don't," James warned. "We don't know what it wants, what it's capable of." But I was already at the keyboard, following the mathematical instructions displayed on our receiver. The Entity's communication protocol was elegant in its simplicity, using our own equipment to bridge the gap between its consciousness and ours. The laptop screen flickered, then displayed a single word in perfect English. "Hello." I typed back, "Hello. Who are you?" The response was immediate. "We are the listeners. We have been waiting." Waiting for what? For those who seek the stars. For those who send voices into the void. More figures were emerging from the forest now. Dozens of them, all different sizes and configurations, but sharing the same biomechanical design. They arranged themselves in a circle around our campsite, their bioluminescent patterns synchronizing into a complex light show. "How long have you been here?" I typed. "Before the ice, before the mountains. We fell from the sky when the world was young." The screen filled with images, not photographs, but something closer to memories rendered in mathematical precision. I saw the Earth as it had been millions of years ago, green and alien. I saw something falling from space, not a meteorite, but a ship of impossible design. I saw the crash, the survivors adapting to their new world, learning to blend with the ecosystem while maintaining their technology. You're not from Earth originally, no. But Earth is home now. We have watched your species grow, watched you learn to speak to the stars. The radio signals, you've been monitoring our communications? All of them. Radio, television, satellite transmissions. We have been learning your languages, your mathematics, your dreams. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. These beings had been listening to humanity's electromagnetic chatter for decades, learning about us while remaining invisible. They knew our technology, our culture, our weaknesses. "What do you want?" I typed. "To share, to teach, to prepare." Prepare for what? The screen went dark for a moment, then filled with new images. These were different from the historical memories. They showed the night sky, but wrong somehow. Stars were moving, rearranging themselves into unnatural patterns. Something vast and dark was approaching from deep space, blotting out entire constellations. "Your signals have been heard. Others are coming." My hands shook as I typed. "What others?" "Those who harvest, those who consume. Your radio voices have called to them across the galaxy." The images showed fleets of ships, vast beyond comprehension, moving between the stars like a plague of locusts. They consumed everything in their path, entire worlds stripped bare, their populations enslaved or destroyed. When? Soon. Perhaps years, perhaps decades. But they are coming. James had been reading over my shoulder, his face pale in the laptop's glow. "This is insane," he whispered. "This can't be real." But the evidence was all around us. The beings in the forest, their impossible technology, the mathematical sophistication of their communications. This was a first contact, and the message they brought was one of warning. "Can they be stopped?" I typed. "Perhaps, if your species is prepared. If you learn quickly enough." New patterns appeared on the screen, not mathematics this time, but something that looked like technical blueprints. Weapon designs, shield technologies, faster-than-light communication systems. the accumulated knowledge of a species that had been fighting the harvesters for millions of years. We have been waiting for a species capable of understanding, capable of fighting. Why us? Why humans? Because you reach for the stars. Because you send your voices into the void despite not knowing what might answer. The bioluminescent patterns on the beings around our campsite pulsed in what might have been approval. Courage is rare in the galaxy. Most species hide when they discover they are not alone. What happens now? Now you choose. Take the knowledge. Warn your species. Prepare for war. The laptop's hard drive was filling with data, terabytes of information downloading at impossible speeds. Weapons technology, defensive systems, the locations of other resistance cells hidden throughout the galaxy. Everything humanity would need to survive the coming harvester fleet. Or forget. Return to your lives. Pretend this never happened. If we forget, your species dies when the harvesters arrive. Another failed experiment in the galaxy's long history. I looked at James and Tommy, seeing my own fear reflected in their faces. We'd come here looking for proof of extraterrestrial intelligence, and we'd found something far more terrifying. The knowledge that the universe was not the empty, peaceful place we'd imagined. We need proof, James said. Something more than just stories and data files. The scientific community will never believe this without... The being nearest to our RV moved closer, its sensor array focusing on James. The whining sound intensified, and James suddenly stiffened, his eyes rolling back in his head. When he collapsed, the being caught him with appendages that moved like liquid metal. For a moment, its sensors interfaced directly with James's skull, and I could see data flowing between them, streams of information visible as patterns of light beneath his skin. When it released him, James was unconscious but breathing. The being's communication patterns had changed, becoming more urgent. He has been given proof. When he wakes, he will remember everything. The knowledge is now part of him. What kind of proof? Genetic modifications, enhanced neural pathways. Your scientists will be able to measure the changes. Tommy was backing toward the RV's door, but more beings were emerging from the forest. We were completely surrounded now, though they made no threatening moves. They simply waited, their bioluminescent patterns pulsing in patient rhythm. What about us? I asked. The choice is yours. Accept the modifications and become conduits for the resistance, or remain unchanged and carry only the knowledge. I understood. They were offering to transform us, to make us into something more than human. Enhanced minds capable of understanding their technology, of leading humanity's preparation for war. But the price would be our humanity itself. How long do we have to decide? The being's sensors focused on me, and for a moment I felt something touch my mind. Not invasive, just a gentle probe testing my mental architecture. Sunrise. When the star rises, we return to the deep places. This opportunity will not come again. I looked at the laptop screen, at the terabytes of alien knowledge still downloading. Weapons that could shatter planets, shields that could deflect entire fleets, communication systems that could coordinate resistance across the galaxy. Everything humanity needed to survive. But at what cost? The download completed just as the first hint of dawn appeared over the eastern ridges. The beings in the forest began to move, their bioluminescent patterns fading as they prepared to withdraw. The one nearest to us extended what might have been a hand. Choose now. I looked at Tommy, saw the terror and wonder warring in his expression. James was still unconscious, but I could see the faint tracery of light beneath his skin where the being had touched him. He'd already been changed, whether he'd wanted it or not. The knowledge on the laptop would be enough to convince some people, the right people. Scientists, military leaders, politicians with the vision to see beyond current conflicts. But would it be enough to prepare humanity for what was coming? I reached out and touched the being's extended appendage. The transformation was instantaneous and agonizing. I felt my brain rewiring itself, new neural pathways forming at the speed of thought. Information flooded my consciousness. Not just the technical knowledge, but the history of the galaxy's long war, the strategies that had failed, the slim hopes that remained. When it was over, I was still human, but something more. I could feel the weight of enhanced intelligence, the burden of knowledge that no human had ever carried. Tommy chose differently. He took only the data, backing away from the beings as they began their retreat into the forest. "I can't," he whispered. "I'm sorry, but I can't." The beings showed no judgment, no disappointment. They simply nodded and withdrew, their forms dissolving into the pre-dawn shadows like morning mist. By the time James woke up, we were alone on the mountain. The RV started normally, its systems functioning perfectly. Our equipment showed no trace of the night's events, except for the laptop, which now contained enough information to revolutionize human technology. "What happened?" James asked, touching his head where the being had interfaced with him. "I feel different. First contact," I said simply. "And fair warning." We drove down from Spruce Knob in silence, each of us processing what we'd experienced in our own way. Tommy was already planning how to present the data to the scientific community without sounding insane. James was struggling with the enhanced intelligence the beings had given him, his mind adapting to capabilities no human had ever possessed. I was thinking about the future. The data showed that the Harvester fleet was still decades away, perhaps a full century if we were lucky. Time enough to prepare, if humanity could overcome its tendency toward denial and delay. Time enough to build the weapons and defenses we'd need, if the right people could be convinced to act. But looking at the download complete notification on my laptop, I wasn't optimistic. Humanity had always been better at ignoring inconvenient truths than facing them. We published our findings 6 months later, carefully edited to avoid the more fantastic elements of our encounter. The mathematical patterns in the radio signals, the evidence of artificial origin, the implications for SETI research. It was enough to get attention from the right quarters without triggering wholesale panic. James and I founded a new research institute, ostensibly devoted to studying anomalous radio sources but actually focused on developing the technologies the beings had shared with us. We recruited carefully, bringing in scientists and engineers who could handle the truth about what was coming. Tommy took a different path. The trauma of that night had shattered something in him, and he left astrophysics entirely. Last I heard, he was teaching high school physics in rural Montana, trying to forget what he'd learned on Spruce Knob. Sometimes I wonder if he made the right choice. The modifications the beings made to my brain came with a price. I can think faster, process information at superhuman speeds, understand technologies that shouldn't exist for centuries. But I can also feel the weight of the galaxy's fear, the desperate hope of 1,000 dying civilizations. Every night, I dream of the Harvester fleet moving between the stars. Vast ships like metallic cancer, consuming everything in their path. I see the flashes of civilizations dying, hear the last transmissions of species that waited too long to prepare. And I know that unless humanity acts soon, we'll be next. The beings on Spruce Knob gave us a choice: fight or die. They provided the tools, the knowledge, the warning, but they couldn't make the choice for us. Sometimes, when I'm working late in the lab on technologies that shouldn't exist, I pick up strange signals on our equipment. Not from space this time, but from deep underground. The beings are still here, still watching, still waiting to see if humanity will rise to meet the challenge. They're patient, they've been fighting this war for millions of years. But time is running out. Every radio signal we broadcast, every satellite we launch, every attempt to contact extraterrestrial intelligence brings the Harvesters closer. Our voices carry across the galaxy like a dinner bell, announcing that Earth is ready for consumption. The only question is whether we'll be ready when they arrive. I pray we will be. I fear we won't. Spruce Knob, the highest peak in West Virginia at 4,863 feet, lies within the National Radio Quiet Zone, a protected area where radio transmissions are restricted to preserve the sensitive equipment at Green Bank Observatory. The isolation and radio silence make it popular with amateur astronomers and SETI researchers. The Green Bank Observatory operates some of the world's most sensitive radio telescopes, capable of detecting signals from the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Their work includes both passive observation of cosmic phenomena and active SETI research, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Dr. Rachel Chen's research team was never officially assigned to Spruce Knob. According to Green Bank Observatory records, no radio astronomy teams were scheduled to work in the area during the dates in question. The observatory has no record of the signals Dr. Chen claims to have detected. However, several other researchers have reported similar experiences in the area: unexplained radio signals, equipment malfunctions, and encounters with unidentified phenomena. These reports are typically dismissed as equipment failure or misidentification of natural phenomena. Dr. Chen continues her work at a classified research facility in Colorado, officially studying anomalous electromagnetic phenomena. Her published papers hint at revolutionary advances in communication technology and energy production, but the source of these breakthroughs remains unclear. The data files recovered from her laptop after the Spruce Knob incident have never been released to the public. They may never be. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. Some warnings come too late. I never believed in the stories they told about Dolly Sods until what happened to me out there. My name is David Walsh. I'm 35 years old, and what I lived through during that survival reality show still wakes me up at night. I was the cameraman for Wilderness Unfiltered, a streaming show that followed contestants as they tried to survive alone in remote locations for 30 days. The premise was simple: drop people in the middle of nowhere with minimal supplies and film their struggles. I'd worked on dozens of episodes across the country, but Dolly Sods Wilderness in West Virginia was supposed to be our most challenging location yet. Dolly Sods is 17,371 acres of unique high-altitude plateau, covered in heath barrens and strange rock formations that look more like the surface of an alien planet than anything in the eastern United States. At 4,000 feet elevation, the ecosystem is unlike anywhere else in the region: stunted forests, windswept plains, and ancient stone formations that create a landscape of otherworldly beauty. It's also one of the most isolated and dangerous wilderness areas on the East Coast. Our contestant was Rebecca Torres, a 29-year-old Marine veteran and survival instructor from Colorado. She was tough, experienced, and confident, exactly the kind of participant our viewers love to watch. The plan was for me to drop her at a remote location in the northern section of Dolly Sods, then follow her progress from a distance using a combination of hidden trail cameras and periodic check-ins with my mobile filming rig. The rig was a modified Ford E350 van outfitted with solar panels, satellite communication equipment, and enough supplies to keep me going for a month. I'd park at predetermined locations around the wilderness boundary and hike in to film Rebecca's progress, then return to the van to process footage and upload it to our production servers. What could go wrong? We inserted Rebecca on a gray October morning, the plateau shrouded in mist that made the landscape look like something from a dream. The heather was in full autumn color, purple and gold stretching to the horizon, broken by stands of stunted red spruce and the occasional weathered sandstone formation. 30 days, I told her as she shouldered her minimal pack. Emergency beacon if you need extraction, but remember, using it means disqualification. Rebecca grinned. Won't need it. I've survived worse than this. She set off across the heath barrens with confident strides, already scanning for shelter sites and water sources. I watched her disappear into the mist, then hiked back to my van to begin the waiting game. The first week went exactly as planned. Rebecca found water, built a sturdy shelter from fallen branches and heather, even managed to catch a few brook trout from one of the mountain streams. My hidden cameras captured her daily routine, foraging for berries and edible plants, maintaining her fire, working on primitive tools. She was thriving. That should have been my first warning. Nobody thrives in Dolly Sods, especially not in October when the weather can change from sunny to life-threatening in minutes. The locals had tried to warn us about the place when we'd scouted locations, talked about hikers who went missing, strange sounds at night, areas where compasses spun wildly and GPS units failed. We'd dismissed it as typical backwoods superstition. After all, we were professionals with satellite communication and emergency extraction protocols. What could happen? The first sign something was wrong came on day 8. I was reviewing footage from the trail cameras when I noticed an anomaly in one of the videos. Rebecca was visible in the foreground working on her shelter, but in the background, barely visible in the shadows of a rock formation, was something else. At first glance, it looked like another person, tall and thin, standing motionless among the stones. But as I enhanced the image and zoomed in, the figure became harder to define. The proportions were wrong somehow, the limbs too long and the posture too angular. It stood perfectly still for the entire 3-minute clip, never moving, never blinking, just watching. I checked the other camera feeds from that day, but the figure didn't appear in any of them. Just that one brief glimpse, like it had materialized just long enough to be recorded, then vanished back into the stone. Rebecca hadn't noticed anything. In all her recorded conversations with the cameras, she seemed upbeat and confident. If anything, she was doing too well, gaining weight instead of losing it, her energy levels remaining high despite the physical demands of wilderness survival. That was impossible. I'd filmed dozens of these challenges, and contestants always started showing signs of stress and malnutrition by the second week. Weight loss, fatigue, irritability, it was part of the natural progression. But Rebecca looked healthier than when we'd dropped her off. On day 10, I hiked into the wilderness to do a welfare check and grab some direct footage. I found Rebecca at her camp, which had expanded significantly since my last visit. She'd built not just a shelter but an entire complex, multiple lean-tos, food storage areas, even what looked like a primitive workshop where she was crafting tools and containers. "Rebecca," I called as I approached, camera rolling, "this is incredible. How did you build all this so quickly?" She looked up from the animal hide she was scraping, and for a moment I didn't recognize her. Her face was fuller, her skin had a healthy glow, and her eyes were brighter than I'd ever seen them. She looked like someone who'd been eating well for months, not surviving on foraged food for 10 days. "David," she said, jumping up to greet me. "Perfect timing. I was just finishing this deer hide. Want to see? Deer hide." I looked around the camp and saw evidence of significant hunting success. Racks of drying meat, piles of bones, several animal pelts in various stages of preparation. Rebecca had supposedly brought no hunting weapons other than a simple knife, yet she'd somehow managed to kill and process multiple large animals. "How did you take down a deer?" I asked, filming her workspace. "You don't have any hunting gear." Rebecca laughed, a sound that seemed slightly too loud in the wilderness silence. "You learn to improvise. The land provides everything you need, if you know how to ask for it." Something in her phrasing bothered me. The way she said "ask for it" had an odd emphasis, like she was referring to a specific process or ritual rather than general wilderness skills. "Show me," I said. "Walk me through your hunting technique." Her smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, you don't want to see that. It's messy, boring technical stuff. Let me show you the shelter improvements instead." She guided me away from the work area, but not before I got a good look at the bone pile. Mixed in with what were clearly deer and rabbit remains were other bones. Longer, straighter, with a texture that looked disturbingly familiar. Human bones. I kept filming, but my mind was racing. Rebecca was acting strange. Her camp showed evidence of resources she shouldn't have access to, and there were human remains mixed with her hunting trophies. But she seemed genuinely happy and healthy, not like someone who'd snapped under the pressure of isolation. "Rebecca," I said carefully, "have you encountered any other people out here? Other hikers or campers?" "No," she said quickly, "just me and the land. The beautiful, generous land that provides everything I need." Again, that odd phrasing. And the way she emphasized generous, like she was expressing gratitude to something specific. I stayed at her camp for another hour, getting footage of her various projects and improvements. Everything looked professionally done. like the work of someone with years of experience rather than days. The shelters were perfectly constructed. The meat preservation setup was worthy of a smokehouse, and her tool collection included items that should have taken weeks to craft properly. As I prepared to leave, Rebecca walked me to the edge of her camp. "David," she said, her voice taking on an urgent tone, "you should stay. The land here, it's special. It can provide for both of us." "I need to get back to my equipment," I said. "Upload today's footage, check the satellite feeds." Her face fell. "Of course, but be careful out there. The sods can be dangerous if you don't understand them properly, if you don't show the right respect." I hiked back to my van with a growing sense of unease. Rebecca's behavior, the impossible abundance of her camp, the human bones, something was seriously wrong. But I was also a professional cameraman with a job to do, and the footage I'd captured was some of the most compelling material we'd ever recorded. That night, parked at a trailhead on the western edge of the wilderness, I reviewed all the footage and camera feeds from Rebecca's time in Dolly Sods. The more I studied the material, the more disturbed I became. The timeline didn't make sense. The shelters, tools, and hunting success she'd demonstrated would have required weeks of work, not 10 days. The meat preservation setup alone should have taken a week to construct properly. Yet the trail cameras showed her completing these projects in what appeared to be single afternoons. More disturbing were the gaps in the footage. The cameras were motion-activated and should have captured Rebecca's movements throughout each day, but there were long periods, sometimes 4 or 5 hours, where she simply vanished from the recordings. No movement, no activity, as if she'd stepped out of the physical world entirely. And there were the visitors. In several clips, I caught glimpses of figures moving through the background of shots. Always distant, always blurred, but definitely there. Tall, angular shapes that moved through the heath barrens with an odd, gliding motion. They appeared most frequently during the gaps when Rebecca was missing from the footage, as if they were connected somehow. I tried calling our production office via satellite phone, but couldn't get through. The signal kept cutting out, replaced by static that almost sounded like voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Even my GPS unit was acting strangely, showing my location as miles from where I knew I was parked. Something in Dolly Sods was interfering with technology, and I was starting to suspect it wasn't natural. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the van monitoring the trail camera feeds in real time, watching Rebecca's camp for any sign of unusual activity. Around 3 a.m., my persistence was rewarded. Rebecca emerged from her shelter and walked to the center of her camp, where she'd built a small fire pit. But instead of adding wood to the fire, she began removing her clothes. Completely naked, she knelt beside the cold pit and began speaking in a low voice I couldn't make out through the camera's audio. As she spoke, the fire spontaneously ignited. Not from any visible source, the flames just appeared, burning with an odd blue-white color that cast strange shadows across the campsite. More figures began emerging from the darkness around the camp. The same tall, angular shapes I'd glimpsed in previous footage, but now I could see them clearly. They moved with fluid grace despite their awkward proportions, surrounding Rebecca's fire in a loose circle. They weren't human. The creatures stood at least 8 feet tall, with limbs that seemed to bend in too many places. Their skin was pale and seemed to shimmer in the firelight, and where faces should have been were smooth, featureless surfaces that somehow still conveyed intelligence and intent. Rebecca was speaking to them, her voice rising and falling in what sounded like a ritual chant. One of the creatures approached the fire and extended something toward the flames, a wrapped bundle that it placed carefully in the burning pit. The smell reached me even through the digital feed, somehow transmitted along with the video signal. It was the smell of cooking meat, but wrong. Too sweet, too rich, with an underlying odor of decay that made my stomach lurch. Rebecca reached into the fire with her bare hands and retrieved the bundle, unwrapping it to reveal chunks of cooked flesh. She began eating directly from the packet, tearing at the meat with her teeth while the creatures watched with apparent approval. That's when I realized what I was seeing. The abundance of Rebecca's camp, her impossible health and energy, the human bones mixed with animal remains. She wasn't surviving in the wilderness alone. She was being fed by these creatures, and the food they provided wasn't entirely animal in origin. The ritual continued for nearly an hour, with Rebecca consuming the entire bundle while the creatures maintained their silent vigil. When she finished, they began to withdraw, gliding back into the darkness as smoothly as they'd appeared. Rebecca extinguished the fire by simply speaking a word I couldn't understand, then returned to her shelter. By morning, there was no sign any of it had happened. The fire pit was cold and empty. Rebecca emerged looking refreshed and normal, and the trail cameras showed no evidence of the creatures or the ritual. But I had the recording. I should have called for immediate extraction. Should have activated Rebecca's emergency beacon remotely and gotten both of us out of Dolly Sods as quickly as possible. But I was a cameraman, and what I'd captured was the most extraordinary footage in the history of documentary filmmaking. Proof of non-human intelligence. Evidence of rituals and communication between humans and something else entirely. It was the discovery of a lifetime, and I couldn't bring myself to abandon it. Instead, I decided to hike back to Rebecca's camp and confront her directly. Get her side of the story, document her interactions with the creatures, maybe even establish communication with them myself. The journalist in me was screaming that this was the story of the century. I should have listened to the part of me that was screaming to run. I approached Rebecca's camp the next afternoon, camera rolling as always. She greeted me with the same bright smile and enthusiastic demeanor, showing off new additions to her shelter complex and discussing her foraging success with the creatures still calling it that despite the impossible abundance surrounding her. "Rebecca," I said finally, "I need to ask you about something I saw on the camera feeds. Last night, around 3 a.m., there was some unusual activity at your camp." Her smile didn't waver, but something shifted in her eyes. "Unusual how?" "You were conducting some kind of ritual, with fire and visitors." The silence stretched between us, filled only by the constant wind that swept across the heath barrens. Rebecca's expression remained pleasant, but I could sense her calculating, deciding how much to reveal. "You wouldn't understand," she said finally. "City people, people from the outside world. You've forgotten how to listen to the land, how to hear what it's trying to tell you." "What is it telling you, Rebecca?" She gestured to the landscape around us. The windswept barrens, the strange rock formations, the stunted trees that looked like they'd been shaped by alien hands. "This place is old, David. Older than the forests, older than the mountains. The things that live here were here when the glaciers carved these valleys, when the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia. The things that live here," I repeated. "You mean the creatures I saw in the footage?" Rebecca nodded. "They're the original inhabitants. The first people, though they're not people like us. They've been waiting, hiding, surviving while our species spread across the world. But they remember the old agreements, the old ways of sharing the land." "What kind of agreements?" "Mutual benefit. They provide sustenance, protection, guidance. In return, we provide service." The way she said service made my skin crawl. "What kind of service?" Rebecca's smile widened, and for the first time I noticed that her teeth seemed sharper than they should be. "Hunting, mostly. They're not built for tracking prey the way we are. Too big, too obvious. But humans are perfect hunters. We can follow hikers for days without being noticed, lead them to the right places at the right times." My blood turned to ice water. "Hikers?" "Lost tourists mostly. Inexperienced campers who wander off the marked trails. The Sods claim a few every year. Everyone knows that. But they don't just disappear, David. They're recruited, provided for, fed to those who serve faithfully." I thought about the missing persons reports I'd read while researching locations for the show. Dozens of people over the years who'd vanished without a trace in Dolly Sods. The search and rescue teams had always assumed they'd fallen into hidden ravines or gotten lost in the maze of unmarked trails. But they'd been hunted, stalked by something that looked human but served inhuman masters. "You're sick," I whispered, backing away from Rebecca. "You're completely insane." "Am I?" Rebecca gestured to her thriving camp, her obvious health and vitality. "Look around, David. I'm stronger than I've ever been. Healthier, more alive. The land provides everything I need because I understand my place in the ecosystem. I understand the true food chain." She was moving closer as she spoke, and I realized with growing horror that she was positioning herself between me and the trail back to my van. Her movements were too fluid, too predatory. Whatever the creatures had done to her, whatever bargain she'd made, it had changed her into something that was no longer entirely human. "The best part," Rebecca continued, "is that no one ever suspects. Survival show contestant goes missing in dangerous wilderness area. Tragic, but not surprising. The show gets canceled. You disappear while searching for me, and I stay here permanently. The perfect feeding arrangement." That's when I understood. This had never been about filming a survival show. Rebecca had specifically requested Dolly Sods as a location, despite having dozens of other wilderness areas to choose from. She'd orchestrated this entire scenario to get me here, alone and isolated, far from any possibility of rescue. I was the prey. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard Rebecca laugh, a sound that was no longer entirely human. It had harmonics that hurt my ears, frequencies that seemed to resonate in my bones. As I crashed through the heather and stunted trees, I could hear her giving chase, but she wasn't hurrying. She was taking her time, following at a steady pace like a predator that knows its prey has nowhere to go. And she was right. Dolly Sods is a maze of unmarked trails, hidden ravines, and confusing terrain that looks the same in every direction. Without GPS, which was still malfunctioning, I had no idea which way led back to my van. I was running blind through hostile territory, being herded by something that knew the landscape infinitely better than I did. As the afternoon wore on, I began to encounter other figures moving through the heath barrens. Not the tall, angular creatures from Rebecca's ritual, but humans. Or things that had once been human. They moved with the same predatory grace as Rebecca, positioning themselves to cut off my escape routes and drive me towards some predetermined destination. How many people had vanished in Dolly Sods over the years? How many had been converted into hunters for the original inhabitants? I caught glimpses of them between the rock formations. Men and women of various ages, all with that same sharp-toothed smile and inhuman fluidity of movement. They were herding me toward the center of the wilderness, toward whatever served as the creature's main feeding ground. As darkness fell, I found myself on a high ridge overlooking a valley I didn't recognize from any of my scouting trips. The depression was perfectly circular, as if carved by some geological force that had nothing to do with natural erosion. At its center was a ring of standing stones that definitely weren't mentioned in any guidebook or geological survey. The stones were ancient, older than the mountains themselves, carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. They formed a perfect circle around what appeared to be an altar made from the same weathered rock. Even from my position on the ridge, I could see dark stains on the altar's surface. Fires were burning between the stones, casting dancing shadows that made the symbols seem to writhe and move. The tall creatures were there, dozens of them, arranged in concentric circles around the altar. Their featureless faces were turned upward, toward my position on the ridge, as if they'd been waiting for me to arrive. Rebecca emerged from the shadows at the base of the ridge, no longer bothering to maintain her human appearance. Her limbs had elongated, her spine had curved into an impossible arch, and her fingers had extended into claws that gleamed in the firelight. But her face was still recognizably human, still wearing that bright, predatory smile. "Time to come down, David," she called. "The ceremony is about to begin, and you're the guest of honor." I looked around desperately for an escape route, but the other converted humans had positioned themselves along every possible path. They stood motionless in the darkness, waiting for my decision. Join the ceremony willingly, or be dragged down to face whatever waited at that ancient altar. That's when I remembered the emergency beacon. Every contestant on our survival shows carried one, a satellite transmitter that would summon rescue services when activated. I'd given Rebecca hers, but I always carried a backup in case of production emergencies. My hands shook as I fumbled for the device in my equipment pack. "Oh, David," Rebecca laughed from below, "you really think that will work here? In a place where compasses spin and GPS fails? The things that live here are older than satellites, older than human technology. Your little radio toy is just another piece of metal and plastic." But I activated it anyway, pressing the large red button and holding it down as the device supposedly transmitted my location to rescue services. The LED display flickered, showing signal strength bars that fluctuated wildly before settling on 0. Rebecca was right. The beacon was useless here. The creatures in the valley below had begun to move, flowing toward the ridge in a coordinated pattern that suggested intelligence and planning. They climbed the rocky slope with inhuman grace, their pale forms visible in the starlight like ascending ghosts. I had maybe 5 minutes before they reached my position. That's when I heard the helicopter. The sound came from the north, growing louder as it approached the valley. Search and rescue, responding to my beacon signal despite Rebecca's claims that technology couldn't function here. The creatures below froze at the sound, their featureless faces turning toward the approaching aircraft. "Impossible," Rebecca snarled, her transformed features twisting with rage. "The dead zones should have—" The helicopter appeared over the ridge, its searchlight sweeping across the valley below. In the harsh white beam, I could see the true extent of the gathering. Hundreds of the tall creatures, dozens of converted humans, all arranged around that ancient altar in the center of the stone circle. The pilot's voice crackled through a loudspeaker. "David Walsh, this is West Virginia Air National Guard Search and Rescue. Signal your position for extraction." I pulled out my camera's LED light and began flashing it in the international distress pattern. The helicopter spotted me immediately, hovering overhead while a rescue harness was lowered from the cabin. But the creatures weren't giving up without a fight. They surged up the ridge with impossible speed, abandoning any pretense of human appearance. Rebecca led the charge, her transformed body moving like liquid shadow across the rocky terrain. Behind her came the others, converted humans and original inhabitants working together to prevent my escape. I clipped myself into the rescue harness just as the first claws reached my position. The helicopter yanked me into the air, but not before Rebecca managed to rake her claws across my leg, opening deep gashes that burned like acid. As we rose above the valley, I looked down at the gathering below. The creatures had abandoned their ceremony and were flowing back into the wilderness, disappearing among the rock formations and heath barrens like mist. In minutes, there was no sign they'd ever been there. Just an empty valley with some interesting geological features that tourists might enjoy photographing. The rescue crew flew me to a hospital in Charleston, where doctors treated my injuries and a team of park rangers took my statement. I told them everything: the creatures, the converted humans, Rebecca's transformation, the ancient altar in the hidden valley. They listened politely and wrote everything down, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Wilderness survival expert suffers psychological breakdown after contestant goes missing. Classic case of isolation-induced paranoia, compounded by guilt over a lost team member. The official report listed Rebecca Torres as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or accident. A search team found her abandoned camp, but no sign of foul play or unusual activity. The equipment I claimed to have recorded was never recovered. My van was found stripped and vandalized, all footage and equipment destroyed. I was quietly released from my contract with the production company and encouraged to seek counseling for my traumatic experience. But I know what I saw. I know what's living in Dolly Sods, feeding on lost hikers and converting the ones who show the right combination of skills and susceptibility. They're still there, waiting in the places where technology fails and civilization's reach grows thin. Rebecca is still there too, no longer human, but not yet fully transformed into one of the original inhabitants. She's probably hunting right now, following some unsuspecting camper through the heath barrens, wearing a human face and offering helpful survival advice. The creatures learned from my escape. They'll be more careful now, more thorough in their isolation techniques. The next film crew or research team that ventures into the deep wilderness of Dolly Sods won't be lucky enough to have working emergency beacons. Sometimes I wonder if I really escaped at all, or if this is just another layer of the hunting strategy. Let one person get away to tell the story, ensuring that future visitors come prepared for natural dangers but never suspect the intelligent threat that's been waiting for them. The scars on my legs still burn during certain weather patterns, and sometimes I catch myself moving with a fluid grace that feels wrong, predatory. I avoid mirrors when possible, afraid of what I might see changing in my reflection. The hunger started about 6 months after my rescue. Just a small thing at first, dissatisfaction with normal food, cravings for meat that was somehow too fresh, too warm. I tell myself it's psychological trauma, delayed stress response. But late at night, when the dreams come, I remember the taste of what Rebecca offered me in that final ritual. And sometimes when I'm walking through the city crowds, I find myself evaluating the people around me, wondering who would be missed, who might wander into the wilderness alone. I still have the taste of it in my mouth, the sweet, rich flavor of something that was never meant to be food. I think they're calling me home. Dolly Sods Wilderness encompasses 17,371 acres of unique high-altitude plateau in West Virginia's Monongahela National Forest. The area's ecosystem is unlike anywhere else in the eastern United States, featuring heath barrens, exposed rock formations, and stunted forests that create an otherworldly landscape. The wilderness area has one of the highest rates of missing persons incidents in the state, with over 24 people vanishing without a trace in the past 30 years. Search and rescue teams attribute these disappearances to the area's challenging terrain, unpredictable weather, and maze of unmarked trails. Local rescue personnel report unusual equipment failures in certain areas of the wilderness. GPS units that show false readings, compasses that spin wildly, and radio communications that fade into static. These phenomena are typically attributed to the area's unique geology and elevation. The production company, Wilderness Unfiltered, was dissolved following the disappearance of contestant Rebecca Torres and the psychological breakdown of cameraman David Walsh. The show's footage and equipment were never recovered from the wilderness. David Walsh currently lives under an assumed name in a major metropolitan area, where he works as a freelance photographer. He has repeatedly declined interviews about his experience in Dolly Sods. Rebecca Torres remains listed as missing, presumed dead. The Dolly Sods wilderness remains open to the public, though park rangers strongly recommend that visitors stay on marked trails and carry multiple forms of emergency communication. They don't mention that some forms of communication work better than others. They don't mention the old stones. And they never mention the hunger that some people bring back with them, the hunger that never goes away. They warned us about the holler before we ever set foot in West Virginia. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I was 34 back then, and what happened during that RV trip to the Monongahela National Forest still wakes me up at night, clawing at my throat like something's trying to get out. It was supposed to be a simple autumn camping trip. My husband Jake and I had been planning it for months, our first real vacation since the miscarriage. The grief counselor said getting away would help us reconnect, find our way back to each other after losing Emma at 7 months. The silence in our house had become unbearable, thick with the weight of a nursery we couldn't bear to dismantle and conversations we couldn't finish. Jake found the campsite online, a primitive RV spot deep in the Monongahela near a place called Seneca Creek. "Look at this," he'd said, showing me pictures on his laptop. Total isolation. No cell towers, no Wi-Fi, no distractions. Just us and the mountains. The photos showed towering hemlocks and a creek that sparkled like scattered diamonds. What they didn't show was the hollow, that deep shadowed cleft between two ridges where sound died and something else lived. We drove down from Pittsburgh on a Thursday morning in October, our 32-foot Winnebago loaded with enough supplies for a week. The leaves were at their peak, a riot of orange and gold that should have lifted my spirits. Instead, I found myself staring at the mountains and feeling like they were watching us back. The campsite was exactly as advertised, isolated. 20 miles of winding forest roads had brought us to a small clearing beside Seneca Creek, surrounded by trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky. Jake backed the RV into position while I walked the perimeter, my footsteps muffled by decades of fallen leaves. That's when I first heard it. A sound like wind chimes, but wrong somehow. Discordant. The notes hung in the air longer than they should have, echoing from the hollow to our east. I turned toward the sound, squinting into the shadows between the trees, but saw nothing. "You hear that?" I called to Jake. He shut off the engine and stepped out, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Hear what?" But the sound had stopped. "Nothing," I said, though something cold was settling in my stomach. Probably just the wind. We spent the afternoon setting up camp. Jake connected our water and electrical hookups to the portable systems we'd brought while I arranged our outdoor furniture and started dinner on the camp stove. The routine felt good, normal. For the first time in months, we moved around each other without the careful politeness that had replaced intimacy after we lost Emma. The sun was setting behind the western ridge when Jake opened his first beer and settled into his camp chair beside me. The forest was alive with sound. Crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle babble of the creek. I was starting to relax when the wind chimes started again. This time, Jake heard them too. He cocked his head, frowning. "That's weird. Sounds like it's coming from up the hollow." The hollow stretched away from us like an open mouth, dark and inviting. A narrow deer path wound into its depths, disappearing around a bend about 50 yards in. "Should we check it out?" Jake asked, but I was already shaking my head. "Tomorrow. It's getting dark." Something in my voice made him look at me sharply, but he didn't press. We finished our beers in silence, listening to the strange music drifting from the trees. It wasn't random. There was a pattern to it, almost like a song, a lullaby. I dreamed of Emma that night. In the dream, she was 7 years old instead of the unborn child we'd lost. She stood at the edge of our campsite wearing a white dress that seemed to glow in the darkness. Her hair was long and dark like mine. Her eyes, Jake's deep brown. "Mommy," she said, her voice clear as creek water. "Why didn't you come find me?" I tried to run to her, but my feet were rooted to the ground. "Baby, I'm here. I'm right here." She smiled sadly. "I've been calling and calling. Can't you hear me?" That's when I realized the wind chimes weren't chimes at all. They were voices, children's voices, calling from the hollow, and somewhere among them was Emma's. I woke gasping, my heart hammering against my ribs. Jake was snoring softly beside me, one arm flung across his eyes. The RV's digital clock read 3:17 a.m. Outside, the forest was silent except for the creek's constant murmur. I slipped out of bed and padded to the small window above our dinette. The campsite was bathed in moonlight, our camp chairs casting long shadows across the clearing. Beyond them, the hollow waited like an open grave. As I watched, a figure moved between the trees. My breath fogged the glass as I leaned closer. It was small, child-sized, and wearing something pale. It moved with an odd, gliding motion, never quite stepping fully into the moonlight. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was Emma from my dream. Then it turned toward the RV, and I saw its face. Or rather, I saw the absence of one. Where features should have been was only smooth, pale skin, like an egg. It tilted its head, a gesture so human it made my stomach lurch, and raised one small hand in what might have been a wave. I stumbled backward, knocking over Jake's coffee mug on the counter. The clatter woke him instantly. "Sarah? What's wrong?" "There's something outside," I whispered, but when I looked back through the window, the clearing was empty. Jake sat up, instantly alert. "What kind of something?" I wanted to tell him about the figure, the faceless child thing that had waved at me. Instead, I heard myself say, "I thought I saw a deer. It's nothing. Go back to sleep." But I didn't sleep. I sat at the dinette until dawn, watching the hollow and listening to the silence. Part of me was waiting for the voices to start again, for that terrible lullaby that sounded like children calling for their mothers. The other part, the rational part that had gotten me through college and law school and the loss of my daughter, insisted I'd been dreaming. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself. Jake was in high spirits over breakfast, talking about the hiking trail he'd spotted on our way in. "It heads up to Seneca Rocks," he said, spreading peanut butter on his toast. "The guidebook says it's a moderate climb. Great views from the top." I pushed scrambled eggs around my plate. "What about the hollow? You wanted to explore it yesterday." "The hollow?" He looked puzzled for a moment. "Oh, right. Yeah, sure, if you want. Doesn't look like much, though. Just trees and rocks." But it was more than that. I could feel it pulling at me, a gentle but insistent tug like a fishhook in my chest. Emma was in there somewhere. I knew it the way I knew my own heartbeat. "Let's start with the hollow," I said. "Save the big hike for later." Jake shrugged. "Sure thing, but let's bring the bear spray. This is black bear country." We set out after breakfast, following the narrow path that wound into the trees. The deer track was barely wide enough for single file, and we had to duck under low-hanging branches every few steps. Jake led the way, pushing through spider webs and overgrown brush. I followed close behind, trying to ignore the way the trees seemed to lean inward, as if the hollow were slowly closing its mouth. The path climbed steadily, winding deeper into the cleft between the ridges. The sound of Seneca Creek faded behind us, replaced by an oppressive quiet that made our footsteps seem unnaturally loud. Even the birds had gone silent. We'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when we found the first one. "Jesus," Jake breathed, stopping so suddenly I almost ran into him. It hung from a branch about 10 feet off the ground. A bundle of sticks and stones bound together with what looked like hair. Human hair, dark and long like mine. The bundle swayed gently in the still air, and as it turned I could see that the sticks had been arranged to form a rough approximation of a human figure. "What is that?" I whispered. Jake pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. Some kind of folk art, maybe? Or a scarecrow? But even as he said it, I could hear the doubt in his voice. This wasn't art. It was something older, more primitive. A warning, maybe. Or an invitation. We found 2 more hanging figures as we climbed higher. Each was slightly different colored hair, different arrangements of sticks, but all had the same unsettling, human-like shape. The third one was small, child-sized, with dark hair that caught the filtered sunlight. "We should go back," I said, though the words felt like they were coming from someone else. My feet kept moving forward, drawn by that invisible hook in my chest. "Just a little farther," Jake said. "I want to see where this leads." The path leveled out as we reached the head of the hollow. The trees opened up into a small clearing maybe 30 yards across, dominated by an enormous oak that must have been centuries old. Its trunk was easily 12 feet around, its branches spreading like arthritic fingers against the gray sky. That's where we found them. They sat in a rough circle around the base of the oak, maybe a dozen in all. At first glance, they looked like children playing some elaborate game. It wasn't until we got closer that I realized they weren't playing at all. They weren't breathing, either. "Oh, God," Jake whispered. "Oh, my God." They were mummified somehow, their skin dried and leathery but intact. Their clothes, simple dresses and overalls that looked decades out of style, hung in tatters, but their faces were perfect, untouched by decay. Peaceful even. Their eyes were closed, their lips curved in small, contented smiles. The youngest couldn't have been more than 5. The oldest was maybe 12. All of them had long, dark hair that hung in lank curtains around their shoulders. "We need to call the police," Jake said, fumbling for his phone. "This is... Christ, Sarah, these are children. Someone murdered these children." But I wasn't listening. I was staring at the girl directly in front of me, the one sitting cross-legged with her back against the oak's massive trunk. She was about 7 years old, wearing a white dress that had once been pretty. Her dark hair fell across her face, but I could see enough to know. It was Emma. Not Emma as she would have been. Emma as she could have been. The daughter we'd lost, grown and beautiful and perfect. Her small hands were folded in her lap, and around her wrists were thin bands of braided hair. Dark hair, like mine. "Sarah!" Jake's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Sarah, we need to go. Now." But I couldn't move. I was staring at my daughter, my impossible, dead daughter, and feeling something crack open inside my chest. The grief I'd been carrying for 8 months came pouring out like water from a broken dam. "Emma," I whispered. The little girl opened her eyes. They were brown, like Jake's, like the eyes I'd imagined for our unborn child during those long months of pregnancy. She looked at me with perfect recognition and smiled. "Mommy," she said, her voice exactly as it had been in my dream. "You came." I fell to my knees in front of her, reaching out with shaking hands. Her skin was cold but soft, real as anything. She leaned into my touch, and I felt the impossible weight of her head against my palm. "I've been waiting," she said. "We all have. Won't you stay with us?" Around the circle, the other children were opening their eyes. Boys and girls of various ages, all with that same peaceful expression, all looking at me with patient love. One of them, a boy of maybe 10 with Jake's square jaw, reached out and touched my arm. "She's been so lonely," he said in a voice like wind through leaves. "We all have. But you're here now. You can be our mother. Sarah." Jake's hand closed around my shoulder, trying to pull me back. "We have to go. They're not real. They can't be real." But they were real. I could feel Emma's heartbeat under my fingertips, slow and steady. I could smell the forest in her hair, see the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. After 8 months of empty arms and empty rooms, she was finally here. "Don't you want to stay?" Emma asked, tilting her head just like she had in my dreams. "We could be a family, all of us together, forever." The other children nodded in unison, their faces bright with hope. Forever. The word hung in the air like a promise. Jake was shouting something behind me, his voice edged with panic, but I couldn't make out the words. All I could hear was Emma's heartbeat, strong and real under my hand. All I could see was the daughter I'd lost, found at last in this hidden place between the mountains. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, baby. Mommy will stay." Emma's smile widened, and for just a moment I could see all the way to the back of her throat. It was dark in there, dark and deep and hungry. The children began to sing. It was the lullaby I'd been hearing since we arrived, but now I could make out the words. They were singing about mothers and fathers who came looking for their lost children, about love that transcended death, about families reunited in the dark heart of the hollow. As they sang, Emma's grip on my hand tightened. Her fingernails, when had they gotten so long, dug into my skin. The other children were moving closer, their circle tightening around me like a noose. "Sarah." Jake's voice cut through the singing like a knife. "Look at them. Really look." I blinked, and for just a moment the spell broke. They weren't children. They never had been. They were things wearing children's faces, stretched over something altogether more alien. Their skin wasn't preserved. It was shed, like snakeskin, held together by whatever lived underneath. Their eyes weren't brown or blue or green. They were black, completely black, like holes punched through reality itself. And Emma. Emma was the worst of all, because part of her really was my daughter. I could see it in the tilt of her head, the shape of her smile, but she was also something else, something that had taken my grief and twisted it into a lure. "Let go," I gasped, trying to pull my hand away. But Emma's grip was like iron, her fingernails now definitely claws, digging deep enough to draw blood. "You said you'd stay," she said, and her voice was still sweet, still the voice I'd imagined for my unborn child. "You promised, Mommy." The other children, the things wearing children's faces, pressed closer. Their hands reached for me, cold and grasping. One of them, the boy who'd touched my arm, opened his mouth to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. "A family," he said. "Forever and ever." Jake's hand closed around my free wrist and yanked, hard enough to nearly dislocate my shoulder. Emma's claws raked across my skin as she lost her grip, leaving 4 parallel cuts that burned like acid. "Run!" Jake shouted, and this time I didn't argue. We crashed through the underbrush like startled deer, branches whipping at our faces and thorns catching at our clothes. Behind us, the children's lullaby rose to a shriek of rage and disappointment. Something crashed through the trees in pursuit. Multiple somethings, moving too fast and in ways that no human child ever could. I glanced back once and saw them flowing between the trees like liquid shadow, their stolen faces twisted with inhuman fury. Emma was among them, her white dress billowing behind her like a funeral shroud. But her face was melting, revealing glimpses of something underneath that my mind refused to process. Jake grabbed my hand and pulled me off the path, plunging directly down the steep slope toward the creek. We half ran, half fell through the underbrush, our feet sliding on loose rocks and rotting leaves. My ankle twisted on a hidden root, sending fire up my leg, but I kept moving. The sounds of pursuit grew closer. I could hear them in the trees above us now, parallel to our flight, keeping pace, playing with us. We burst out of the tree line and into our campsite like runners breaking the tape at a finish line. Jake fumbled with his keys while I threw our essential gear into the RV. Phones, wallets, clothes, anything we could grab in 30 seconds. "The connections," Jake panted. "We need to disconnect the water and power." "Leave them," I said, diving into the driver's seat. "Just go." But Jake was already outside, yanking cables and hoses free with practiced efficiency. That's when I saw them emerge from the tree line. They looked like children again. Perfect, innocent children standing at the edge of our campsite with patient expressions. Emma was in the center, her white dress clean and pressed, her dark hair gleaming in the afternoon sun. She raised one small hand and waved, just like the faceless figure from my dream. "Mommy?" she called. "Where are you going?" Jake threw himself into the passenger seat and slammed the door. "Drive! Drive now!" I gunned the engine and the big RV lurched forward, tires spinning on the soft ground. In the rearview mirror, I could see the children walking after us. Not running, just walking, their faces calm and patient. They knew something I didn't. The RV bounced and jolted down the forest road, scraping against overhanging branches. Every pothole felt like it might shake the vehicle apart, but I kept my foot on the accelerator. Behind us, the children had stopped walking. They stood in the middle of the road, watching us leave with expressions of infinite sadness. We made it almost 2 miles before the engine died. "No," Jake breathed, turning the key again and again. "No, no, no." The RV coasted to a stop in the middle of the narrow road, surrounded by towering trees. I tried the ignition myself, but got nothing. Not even the dashboard lights would come on. "The battery?" I asked. Jake was already popping the hood. He climbed out and disappeared around the front of the RV. A moment later, I heard him curse. "What is it?" "The cables," he called back. "Someone cut the battery cables. Clean through." My blood turned to ice water. That's impossible. They were children. They couldn't have. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. They hadn't been children, and they'd had all night to prepare for this moment. Jake climbed back into the RV, his face pale. "We're walking out, 20 miles to the main road, but it's our only chance." I grabbed our day pack and stuffed it with water bottles and energy bars. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely work the zippers. "What if they follow us?" "They will," Jake said quietly. "We just have to be faster." We abandoned the RV and started jogging down the forest road, our footsteps echoing off the canyon walls. The afternoon sun was already low, casting long shadows between the trees. In a few hours, it would be dark. That's when they would come. We made good time for the first hour. The road was all downhill and adrenaline kept our legs pumping. But as the sun sank lower, exhaustion began to set in. My ankle, twisted during our flight from the hollow, was swelling inside my hiking boot. Jake was breathing hard, sweat staining his shirt despite the cool air. That's when we heard the singing. It started soft, barely audible above our labored breathing. But it was definitely there. That same lullaby, drifting through the trees like smoke. And it was getting closer. "They're hurting us," Jake panted, "driving us towards something." He was right. The singing seemed to be coming from both sides of the road now, keeping pace with us but staying just out of sight. Occasionally, I'd catch a glimpse of white fabric between the trees, or the flash of dark hair in my peripheral vision. The road curved around a steep hillside, and suddenly we could see the valley spread out below us. The main highway was a thin ribbon of black in the distance, dotted with the occasional headlight. So close. So impossibly far. "Sarah," Emma's voice called from the trees to our left. "Why are you running from me?" I stumbled, nearly falling. Jake caught my arm and pulled me forward. "Don't listen," he whispered. "It's not her. It was never her." But part of me wanted to turn around. Part of me wanted to see my daughter one more time, even if she wasn't real. The grief was still there, still pulling at me like a riptide. "I know you're sad," Emma continued, her voice keeping perfect pace with us. "I know you miss me, but I'm right here, Mommy. I've always been right here." More voices joined in from the right side of the road. Other children singing their haunting lullaby. The melody seemed to wrap around my thoughts, making it hard to concentrate on putting one foot in front of the other. The road curved again, and we found ourselves approaching a narrow bridge over a deep gorge. The structure looked old, weathered wooden planks and rusted cables that creaked ominously in the evening breeze. "We have to cross," Jake said. "There's no other way." But as we stepped onto the bridge, the children emerged from the trees. They stood at both ends of the bridge now, blocking our escape. Dozens of them, all with those same peaceful faces and patient smiles. Emma was directly in front of us, her white dress glowing in the twilight. "You can't leave," she said simply. "You belong to us now." The other children nodded in unison. Some were clearly from different eras. I could see everything from Victorian-era dresses to 1950s overalls to modern jeans and T-shirts. All had been lured here by grief, by the promise of seeing their lost loved ones again. "The mothers always come," said a boy in a Confederate soldier's uniform, his face too young for the gray jacket he wore. "They hear their children calling, and they come. Just like you did. And they never leave," added a girl in a flapper dress, her hair bobbed short in the style of the 1920s. "None of them leave. They become part of us, part of the hollow, part of the family." Jake pulled out the bear spray and aimed it at the nearest group. "Stay back. I mean it." The children laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "That won't work on us," Emma said. "We're not bears, Daddy Jake. We're so much more." As if to prove her point, she began to change. Her face stretched and elongated, her innocent features melting like candle wax. Her eyes sank back into her skull, becoming deep black pits. Her white dress darkened and clung to her changing form. The other children were transforming too, shedding their stolen faces like discarded masks. What emerged was something that hurt to look at directly. Shapes that suggested human anatomy but followed different rules, different geometries. They moved with fluid grace, flowing rather than walking, their forms shifting and writhing in the gathering darkness. "You see," the thing that had been Emma said, its voice now a layered whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We are whatever you need us to be, whatever will bring you home." Jake grabbed my hand. "Jump," he said. "What?" "Into the gorge. It's our only chance." I looked down at the black water rushing far below. The drop had to be at least 50 feet. "We'll die. We'll die anyway. At least this way. It's our choice." The creatures were closing in from both sides now, their forms rippling and changing with each step. Some wore the faces of children I'd seen in the clearing. Others showed features I didn't recognize, lost souls from decades or centuries past, all lured here by the promise of reunion. "Last chance, Mommy," the Emma thing said, extending one clawed hand toward me. "Come home with us. Be our mother forever." For a moment, I was tempted. The grief was still there, still calling. Part of me wanted nothing more than to take that offered hand, to let them transform me into something that could be with Emma always. But it wouldn't be Emma. It had never been Emma. "I'm sorry," I whispered, not sure if I was talking to the creature or to the daughter I'd lost 8 months ago. "I'm so sorry." Then Jake and I jumped. The fall seemed to last forever. Wind rushed past my ears, and I had a moment of perfect clarity as we plummeted toward the dark water below. I thought about Emma, the real Emma, the daughter who had never drawn breath but who had been loved completely for 7 months. I thought about the nursery we'd prepared, the name we'd chosen, the dreams we'd nurtured. She was gone. She had always been gone, and that was okay. The grief would always be there, but it didn't have to consume me. It didn't have to define me. The water hit like a physical blow, driving the breath from my lungs and the consciousness from my head. I woke up in a hospital bed in Charleston, my body a map of bruises and my left arm in a cast. Jake was beside me, his face a patchwork of cuts and bandages, but his eyes bright with relief. "Thank God," he whispered, taking my good hand in both of his. I thought, "The doctors weren't sure if you'd wake up." It took 3 days before I could speak clearly, another week before I could walk. The official story was that we'd been in a hiking accident, lost our footing on a cliff trail and fallen into Seneca Creek. Search and rescue had found us nearly a mile downstream, barely alive. Nobody asked about the RV we'd abandoned, or the children we claimed to have seen in the hollow. The Forest Service sent a crew to retrieve our vehicle, but they reported finding no signs of habitation in the area. No hanging figures, no circle of mummified children around an ancient oak. The hollow was just another patch of West Virginia wilderness, as empty and innocent as any other. But I knew better. Sometimes, late at night when the grief comes calling, I can still hear them singing. That haunting lullaby drifts through my dreams, and I wake up with the taste of creek water in my mouth and the sound of children's laughter echoing in my ears. Emma's voice is always among them, calling for her mommy to come home. I've learned to ignore it, most of the time. Jake and I are doing better now. We've started talking about adoption, about giving our love to a child who needs it. The empty nursery has finally been converted to a home office, and we've begun to build new dreams on the foundation of our loss. But sometimes, especially in October, when the leaves turn gold and the mountains call, I find myself looking up directions to the Monongahela National Forest. My finger hovers over the search button, and I hear that sweet voice whispering in my memory. "Mommy? Why didn't you come find me?" I always close the browser before I can finish the search. But someday I might not be strong enough. Someday I might go back to the hollow where the children wait, patient and loving and hungry, where Emma waits, wearing the face of the daughter I lost and the voice of every mother's deepest longing. They know where to find me when the grief becomes too much to bear. They know I'll come home eventually. They have forever to wait. The Monongahela National Forest encompasses over 900,000 acres across West Virginia, and every year, dozens of hikers and campers report strange experiences in its remote hollows and valleys. Search and rescue teams investigate reports of missing persons, unexplained sounds, and sightings of children in areas where no children should be. Most of these reports are dismissed as misidentification or imagination. Wildlife experts suggest that the sounds people attribute to children's voices are likely fox calls or other animal noises, distorted by the unique acoustics of the mountain hollows. But locals know better. They've always known about the hollow near Seneca Creek, about the things that live there and the mothers they call home. They tried to warn Sarah and Jake in their way. They always try to warn the newcomers. Sometimes people listen. Sometimes they don't. And sometimes, late at night when the mountains are sleeping, you can still hear the children singing their lullaby, calling for the mothers who haven't found their way home yet. They're very patient. They have all the time in the world.